there's any issues with recording, feel free to let us know or drop from the call. But yes, we would like to be able to publish this after we are wrapped up. So we will be recording. As you are coming into the room, please offer in the chat your name, where you're from, and perhaps a favorite species or a species that you are intrigued with in the tree and shrub world. So I'm Julian Kaspari. Eastern white cedar is my jam, and I am based in Toronto, Ontario for now. So yeah, feel free to drop a little quick intro into the chat as folks are arriving. So I'll do a quick just introduction of CDARC and this series before we jump in and introduce our speakers. So first of all, CDARC is a technology company that's producing tools that empower the ecological community to accelerate our most promising climate solution, that being restoring healthy ecosystems. If you're interested in learning more about us and the tools that we're building, please visit cdarc.io. And Blaine, you can go to the next slide, and you can check out the first tool that we've produced. It's called Squirrel. And there's a QR code there on screen if you'd like a link directly to that. And you can follow us on Instagram as we post related jobs and seed contracts throughout the course of the year. This session today, Blaine, if you can go to the next slide, is the third in an ongoing set of conversations around people who are working with seed, working in restoration ecology and reforestation. And we hope to support an ethical, accessible, and inclusive global community of practice around this work. And we're so glad that you're here today. We have 2 additional sessions in June and July, one on forest fire shaping supply chain and another on carbon markets and the future of seeds in July. All of that is available for sign up on our website if you're interested in taking a look there. And thank you all so much for being here today. I know that everybody's got a busy schedule and the season is ramping up aggressively. So thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your participation. Today, we're going to hear from 3 incredible speakers representing training, education, academia, and labor from across Canada. And we'll leave time for some questions at the end. So please post stuff in the chat as you go. And we are looking forward to jumping in. So Blaine, if you could hop back to the land acknowledgement slide. So this land acknowledgement comes from, I first came across it with the National Native Seed Conference hosted by the Institute of Applied Ecology and BLM. It really spoke to me because I feel like a lot of land acknowledgements feel flat to me. So we're going to offer this before we get going, and we'll jump in a moment. So the land on which we are hosting today's event is the ancestral and continued home of Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge the violence that led to their displacement and recognize that there's much work to be done to rectify our relationships and to prevent future harms. We honor and value the long chain of knowledge acquired by Native peoples, honed through time, relationships, and experiences living with the land. We appreciate and respect Indigenous knowledge holders, recognizing that this way of seeing the world can help us develop new eyes upon the land that we now share. We ask everyone in attendance today, no matter where you are in the world, to consider where you are in this context. Who were and are the Native peoples that lived and live on land you inhabit and work? And if you're unfamiliar with this, we encourage you to get curious to learn about traditional ecological knowledge where you live. We also want to recognize that many things are asked of our Indigenous neighbors, and this is not their burden to bear. So if you want to become more fully educated about where you live, be open and patient with yourself and those around you. Education is not equal to a Google search, nor is it your knowledge to own or share. It takes time and reflection to come to understand, and we hope that in your process, you're able to develop enriched relationships with Native neighbors and ideas. We ask you to help uplift Native peoples and think about how you can contribute to their power, wealth, and health. Please consider making a donation today to groups that support Indigenous peoples, and even better, reach out to initiate business relationships, community relationships, and personal relationships. So with that, I wanted to do a bit of framing around the conversation. Some of what we're sharing on the screen here today is from our Growing Future Forest report, which was published about 18 months ago. And we're going to be covering some of these key themes around demographics and economics and training and mentorship. So first, to share, 58% of seed collectors are over the age of 45. 57% of part-time or contracted collectors are making less than $10,000 a year, working at a medium hourly wage of $27 an hour. 74% have learned the craft on the job, and 91% of seed collectors are doing so for forest nurseries and nursery producers. So just a few stats to sort of overview the field and the realm that we're going to be diving deeper into today. With that, let's jump in and meet the speakers. And I guess we'll have in order on the slide. Sarah, maybe you can go first. What are you up to today as it relates to training and engagement, and how did you end up in this field? We'll try and take a couple minutes for each of you to say hello and introduce yourselves. So Sarah, why don't you start us off?
Sure, thanks, Julian. And you can hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
And thanks everyone for having me today. I'm really excited to speak on the panel, and I'm pumped that CEDARC is shining a light on these very real challenges that we're facing, because they're integrated into our day-to-day, and I'm excited to be speaking about it. Also, hi to my dad who signed in, so I'm very excited about that. I've been working in the training engagement space now for 15 years. I've had a bunch of different roles, so I bring a bunch of different perspectives to the table. I've worked for colleges, Indigenous communities, training agencies, the private sector, but today I'm here as the director of a nonprofit organization called Dexterra Community Initiatives, and we focus heavily on providing real world training, education, and employment opportunities to youth across the country. And that speaks to your previous slide, Julian, where in this space right now, it's an aging demographic. So we have to really bring youth to the forefront to be able to solve this issue. It's through our work at Dexterra Community Initiatives and our partner network that we've been delivering award-winning training in the natural resources sector and capacity building across the country for the last 25 years through our flagship program called the Outland Youth Employment Program. And that's really going to be my focus today in this space, is I'm going to reference that program. But my journey in the training and engagement space, and really my entire life's path, was started 18 years ago as a tree planter. And I know this because yesterday on LinkedIn, it reminded me that I celebrated my 18-year work anniversary at Outland, which is a little bit terrifying.
Oh, congrats.
Thank you. I don't know if that's a congrats or maybe time to rethink my life path. But, like most folks, I started tree planting during university to pay my way through school. And I was immediately hooked. I loved everything about tree planting except planting the trees, of course. And I structured all of my educational and career decisions after that year around planting and the opportunities that were available in that world. And although, it took me on a bit of a winding path that involved a lot of contracts in a lot of remote areas, doing a lot of weird work, including a lot of seasons as a seed collector in Alberta. I'm really happy with the overall impact that it's had on me and where it's brought me today. So the company that I started with, which is called Outland, and I worked for most of my career, it offered a lot of unique, smaller training programs like forest firefighting, remote camps and catering, tree planting, and the Outland Youth Employment Program. And it was really my time at OYEP that solidified my interest in training, capacity building, development, and bridging the gap between work and the need for those skills to be developed at a pre-employment phase. And I started with OYEP as a entry-level contract worker, and since then I kind of just weaved my way through the organization, learning a ton, picking up lots of tips and tricks, and really integrating myself in the space. It hasn't been a linear path, but it really was my time as a tree planter and a cone picker that made me realize like who my people are, and the spaces in the sector that I wanted to work in, and the knowledge and the experience that I gained during those formative years have shaped everything I'm doing today. And it's an underline to all of the work, including the training and engagement work that I participate in now.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. And I'm excited to get into the conversation about like adjacent labor, adjacent roles to seed collection and complementary roles to seed collection in the broader restoration ecology world. And curious, so we'll dive in more about how your program works and supports that, and maybe what we can learn from a seed collection perspective from what you've done with tree planting camps and training and engaging new demographics. So thanks so much for that. Kristen, quick intro from you. What are you up to today as it relates to training and engagement, and how did you end up in this field?
Yeah, so I work for the Forestry Conservation Association, who is sort of the primary provider of the Certified Seed Collector program. So I sort of help coordinate and teach that program, which originally kind of started out of a lot of dedicated people collectively understanding the importance of this knowledge and information, and luckily documented it and decided to kind of create a training program around it. And at various points in times, it was sort of collaboratively done with, you know, organizations like Forest Ontario and other things. And the FGCA is kind of the primary provider of that now under our Ontario Natural Selection sort of certification program, which does encompass a number of other things, that certifying nurseries, seed, and that sort of thing. But definitely the Certified Seed Collector course is definitely the thing we're most well known for in that realm, and sort of had the biggest uptake. And sort of in addition to that, like that's sort of our main standing program of training that we run. But most of what we do and what I do is supporting practitioners, forest practitioners, and other people in educating on forest genetic principles in general, and seed being at kind of the core of that, being sort of that foundation and the start of every forest. So we also kind of manage sort of colonial white pine seed orchards that were originally installed by the ministry and long since kind of let go. So we kind of picked up the helm on that, managing some of those orchards, and we, in addition to that, work with practitioners to install seed production areas, you know, working with seed transfer, supply of seed, those sorts of things, trying to make those connections for people, especially under a changing climate now. People are looking sort of outside their local area to collect seed to help adapt to climate change. So we do a lot of that work as well. And then specific training with nurseries and things like that, especially with things after like the Ontario tree seed plant closure. And, you know, a lot of people had to pick up the pieces from that. So we provided a lot of training and support to sort of help bridge that gap as well for folks.
Wonderful.
So yeah, we do a lot of other things as well, but that's sort of the seed and education piece. And how I got started, I guess some of it I kind of like to think about looking back, that I got my start in the ditches of Tapley Town as a toddler. You know, I spent a lot of time just kind of exploring the world and flowers, and you know, picking flowers and seed, not knowing really what it meant at that time. And then at college, I ended up with a special project called Seed Exchange, which was, I think, really kind of where it sparked my interest. And with that project, I was sort of had to collect native plant seed, process, store it, dry it, and it was sort of sent around the world to other institutions. So it was sort of this program that was meant for research institutions, botanical gardens, things. It was a way of them exchanging seed to sort of increase their own collections. So that was kind of a really neat project. And yeah, I mean, interesting, because at the time I was like, why did I pick that project? It's so niche. Where am I ever going to use this? And yeah, everything I've done since has involved seed. And I actually did my internship with the FGCA, and I spent time looking at seed collection sites, ground truthing them, spent some time in the seed orchards, and then I worked at sort of a large scale restoration nursery where I kind of got the whole gamut from collection to growing to processing, storing, stratifying, and producing seed for restoration. So, and
Great.
then back to the FGCA, full circle.
Yeah, that's an awesome journey and very niche and incredibly necessary, especially in this moment of time. I am also a certified seed collector, very proud. I think I was number 1028 or something like that. So many have graduated, and I'm excited to sort of dig in around like knowing there's a lot of demand for seed out there, and there are certification bodies like your own that are getting people trained up provincially. Yeah, we want to talk a bit more about how do we get those individuals responding to these larger demand signals, especially given the seasonal nature of the work. So excited to dig in on that with you, and appreciate all of the different parts of the tree seed supply chain that you have worked within and beyond. So excited to have you in the conversation, Kristen. So thank you for that intro. And Ryan, over to you. What are you up to today related to training and engagement, and maybe a short bit about how you got into the space?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for having me. My name is Ryan. I work at the NAIT Center for Boreal Research in Peace River, and I'm a part of the Plant and Seed Technology Access Center. So I have been working here for over 10 years now. Just like Sarah, I don't know quite how that happened. Time really flies when you're playing with plants. And yeah, I've been collecting seeds. I've been attempting to optimize their collection, extraction, storage, and then trying to crack those codes, what stratification or priming or scarification is required to sort of optimize our germination rates, and then growing those plants out and planting them mostly in reclamation settings. In our work, we do applied research here at NAIT, so it's very hands-on. We work closely with industry partners to tackle specific problems and specific sites. Yeah, these days I am doing a lot of training. So as of about 2019, all that learning and growing and experimenting I did, I started sharing that with other people. So we work with industry partners and a lot with Indigenous communities and Indigenous owned enterprises. So we do a lot of seed collection training, plant identification training, that extraction and propagation and storage, kind of the whole gamut from looking for the plants and identifying them to growing them into plants and planting them out on sites. Yeah, really happy to be here, and I think this is a great conversation that we need to be having, and I'm super glad to be a part of it.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. And while we're with you on that intro, I'm really curious for you to sort of expand a bit on the partnership with industry, because industry tends to be producing the demand signals that are requiring our response and our training and our engagement of communities and folks that we can get into the field. So can you share a bit about how you work with industry, and you're sort of at this intersection of academia, industry, and working with Indigenous communities, and how do you weave that together in a meaningful way, and what does that look like on an average engagement?
Well, it can be complicated. There's a lot of moving parts. But yeah, whenever possible, we try to get everybody together in the same room or virtually and sort of just start that conversation. So everything from, sometimes I work just specifically with an industry partner, like with a mine. I'll go and train their environmental department on seed collection so that they can have more control over what seeds are being used for their reclamation. But we'll also incorporate the community while we're doing that. We'll have a workshop so everybody knows what's happening in their area. We'll get people involved in collecting and learning about this kind of stuff. And then sometimes, for example, we'll work with an Indigenous industry partner. So ASCII Reclamation is owned by Soto First Nation in British Columbia. So they were sort of my first, they were really kind and welcomed me into the space. And I went and and work with them for a few summers in a row, getting their seed collection program up and running, so that again they had more control over where the seed was coming from for their reclamation projects.
Great. Yeah, I think it's so what does that training look like? Are you hosting week-long trainings? Are you doing species specific stuff? Is it, what are the foundations and what does the detail look like?
So it's pretty varied. So sometimes, like with ASCII, I'm working with Grandmother's Greenhouse in Blueberry First Nation right now, or Blueberry River rather. It can be very in-depth. So I was out once a week for a whole week all last summer with Blueberry, and we're going to be out again all summer again this year. So everything from really intensive like that to, you know, a few days or a week to just sort of pique people's interest, get knowledge out there, get awareness of that, you know, for the young people especially, that this is a real career path and that there is a lot of opportunity out there, especially for entrepreneurial folks that want to maybe start their own businesses. That there is a huge demand and a lot of opportunity. So kind of everything in between as well.
Cool, thanks. And Blaine, if you can bring up that slide on labor guilds, and I don't mean it from the like traditional sense of labor organizing, but maybe we can talk about that as well at some point. But you know, in the restoration ecology space, there are lots of roles that need to be filled, from folks who are managing nurseries to people doing ground truthing and monitoring exercises, to seed collection, to tree planting. There are so many roles, and you know, Ryan, you're talking about like routes to legit career path, and I think that's really important. And seed collection is a seasonal role, and we kind of want to talk a little bit about the other complementary roles that can be surrounding seed collection and create a year-long employment opportunity for people entering in the space. Sarah, seeing the tree planter here, and you know, being in this world, maybe you can share a little bit about how you guys do your recruitment. And you know, as you said in your introduction, like I love everything about it except for the tree planting. Like, how do you bring people into this so that they're excited about it? And is there an opportunity to bridge tree planters with seed collectors, with nursery operators? Can you speak a little bit about those pieces?
Yeah, the recruitment piece is always interesting, and with each generation, it kind of changes a little bit, and you really have to stay up to speed with the needs of each generation. When I was recruited, it was a lot different than it is today. Now it's a lot of social media. Before it was a lot of handshakes and you know, physical career fairs. But I think, you know, to your point, Julian, about, and I think Ryan, you touched on this as well, creating a career out of this and building on opportunities. And it's like, if you look at the seed opportunity and the seed collection opportunity as an individual opportunity, it's a little bit challenging to recruit. But if you look at it as part of a process or a wider sort of cycle where you can integrate other contracts and build off of them, and you pitch that idea that way, it becomes a very lucrative opportunity. And so when I think about seed collection and the recruitment phase and how you can make it appealing, you know, I think about the inputs are very similar. The workflow is very similar. So if you can phrase it like, you can go tree planting, you can go firefighting, you can go seed collecting, you can do vegetation management. And if you combine all of them, you have a full year's worth of work, and it can be incredibly lucrative work. So if we all work together and everybody brings their expertise to the table and their needs as industry players or educational players or trainers, and we create a workflow that makes sense with people's lives, it becomes a more attractive proposition.
Yeah, big time. And I guess one thing that we've been seeing over the last couple of years in this space is that there is a lot of demand for seed, but the contracts and the job postings, if you were, are less available or you know, less publicly circulated. And I think that's an interesting piece of the puzzle that that we need to figure out to make sure that seed collection as a skill set and as a practice is part of this broader restoration ecosystem, employment ecosystem. So Kristen, I wanted to ask a little bit about some of the work with FGCA and, you know, all of the folks that are graduating from the course and getting trained under you guys. How do we get some of those people into positions? Where do you see those folks getting success as far as getting gigs as seed collectors? How do you support that momentum from training into the workforce? Sorry, you're on mute if you're
muted. I think a lot of it, you know, mentorship for if we're talking about independent seed collectors, there needs to be more help for mentorship, whether that and paid mentorship from the people who are kind of aging out of this industry as independent seed collectors. I think also there is more opportunities now, and like what we've seen a shift in Ontario, partially driven out of, you know, a lack of seed and you know, nurseries not necessarily being able to always provide the stock that planting partners need, right? And so some of that's actually, there's been a response in people internally within conservation authorities and other workplaces that have started training people internally, recognizing that they have to do some of that seed collection themselves. So I think there is sort of, there's a couple different ways forward, and depending on the area, like in the South, it might be more practical for some of these people that it's part of their full-time job within the field. In the North, you know, that's highly unlikely to happen, right? Because it's mostly going to be forestry companies and things like that who are contracting. And that's where I do think I agree with Sarah, like having that sort of maybe where somebody hires people and it is they're hired on to do multiple jobs. I think it's pretty hard these days to just be that independent seed collector role in the realm of, you know, liability and insurance and all those other things. If you're trying to do that business effectively, it's very expensive to do it independently. So, but I think even with that, there's still people that are really engaged and interested. Like once people have the seed bug, you know, like they're into seed, and they want to make it happen. And because of obviously the good work that it is and how important and critical it is for our forests. But I think a lot of them, it is that mentorship, especially because initially right away, they're not going to be as efficient. They don't know where all the sites are, you know, and we try our best to give some of the people of techniques of ways to start out with that, as far as like, you know, keep your eyes peeled when you're on your way to the grocery store or going here, so that it's right. Not as sort of outside of your regular routine. But yeah, a lot of it is just reaching out to, like, at this point, sometimes nurseries are also ending up being kind of that mentorship a little bit and starting people out with a small contract, you know, to feel them out and make sure they're getting, you know, both parties kind of get what they want and they need, right? But the nurseries are really relying on these seed collectors to bring in high quality seed. Right. You know, anybody can collect seed, but it takes special skill and knowledge, and care and time to do high quality seed collection, which is what nurseries want.
Yeah, and I'll say as a newly certified seed collector, I don't have a lot of confidence in myself to be like, yeah, I'm going to bring to you germ rates of 90% plus, and I'm going to clean these seeds properly. But, you know, I have a learning journey ahead of me. So I'm sort of curious, there's this combination of certification and mentorship, the mentorship being more like in the field and, you know, in the industry, giving you that tenure, giving you that intimacy with certain species. Let's talk about like the necessity of certification and sort of the training on the job aspects. And Ryan, I'm curious to hear your perspective as you're doing more stuff in Alberta and BC. Is it necessary to be certified as a seed collector out there, and where do you see the most effective on-ramps for new collectors who are interested in taking up this practice?
So in my neck of the woods, there's not an official seed collection certification program. The government of Alberta does have a seed conservation course that they offer, which is very excellent, and I do highly recommend it. So there's no, as far as I know, there's no official certification required, and anybody can collect seeds. But where it's a little trickier is you need to be you need to have professional designation to register those seeds with the government. So if they're going to be used on public lands in forestry or land reclamation or restoration, the tree and shrub seeds need to be registered with the government and stored at the Alberta Tree Improvement and Seed Center in Smoky Lake. And you need to have proper seed collection permits for every seed zone that you're collecting in. So there is some designation kind of certification required, but not everybody on your team needs to have that. You need just at least one person to sort of oversee everything and do the paperwork associated with it.
Great. And as you mentioned, teams going out to do collections under a certified individual or team lead. Yeah, how would you articulate or like share about the experience of seed collectors for certain purposes and projects? Is it individual work? Is it teamwork? Is it done in a SWAT team formation, or is it just waiting and forecasting and waiting for seeds to be ready to go? Like, how does that normally look in some of the restoration projects you've worked on?
Well, there's definitely moments where, many hands make light work kind of thing. So there's times where you want a bunch of people and a bunch of hands just getting in there. And then there's times that sometimes I just prefer to roll around by myself. I can cruise around in the truck, check out the seeds, see how things are maturing. But it's, as everybody knows, like it's a big world. So you need people that know what they're doing in the areas that you're working that year. And
yeah,
Alberta is split up into seed zones. So it can be very difficult, if we're talking about something like aspen, which has a really short collection window, and you're trying to get 3 or 4 different seed zones. It's tough to do that by yourself. So you need people with boots on the ground that know what they're looking for to sort of report back to you.
Right. And just another quick riff on, like, if there's specific species in demand, is that a quick intensive training that you could do in a virtual environment, or a day long or half a day, to get people up to speed to be effective with a certain species? How do you see that kind of training?
Yeah, I think that is reasonable. There's always going to be a little bit of trial and error. Over 10 years, I've definitely collected, if we're sticking with the aspen example, I've collected my fair share of aspen that was not ready yet, and it didn't fluff up. And so the really kind of subtle nuances, they do just take time to get used to. But because we have, all this amazing technology now, somebody can take a picture of a catkin and send it to me. They can open up the capsule and get a picture of the seed inside. So we do offer some training like that. We're sort of just rolling it out this year. It's more of an online format with workbooks and PowerPoints and 360 camera footage and such that people work through on their own and then submit assignments. And then we can, if wanted, we can follow that up with in-person training as well. So I think there is a lot of room for that, and a lot of that sort of that baseline learning can be done like that. And then, you need to maybe spend a little less time one-on-one in the field.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. And Sarah, we're going to come back to you in just a second, but quickly, Kristen, on certification in Ontario, curious about your thoughts on the need for certified seed collectors, and also the extension of your program into a virtual series. Will that also lead to certification, or is that just sort of like an on-ramp and warming people up to understand about seed, and then eventually they go to get certified? Like, what are your thoughts on is there a spectrum of certification, and at what point can somebody enter the industry with the right mentorship and maybe not the certification? There's some gray areas in all of that, I feel.
Yeah, and I mean, certification really is the start. Like as Ryan was talking about, you know, it takes a while to understand the exact nuances of every seed and every species. So I mean, even with certification and I mean within Ontario, it's not necessarily required, right? But it is like most of our main nurseries understand that they at least know that that person has a set of knowledge if they're going to hire that person or contract that person.
Mhm.
So and that's one of those things, like we obviously are looking to expand because this knowledge is needed, and we've gotten funding to sort of take CSC training virtually to a virtual platform that will be available anywhere. And the hope is that people would be getting that full understanding of knowledge. Whether there's different layers of certification, we're still kind of trying to figure that out. And the hope is too that it would also free us up personally to provide more mentorship. So that if you have kind of that initial base training that people are kind of getting virtually, that then we can have a little bit more time spent with hands-on one-on-one mentorship and that sort of thing. So do I always think certification is needed? No, but the knowledge that comes with that training, yes. So, and that is really our goal with increasing that capacity and having people be able to take it everywhere, is not necessarily to get people specifically certified, but to get the knowledge out there. But the certification is a way of telling, you know, the rest of the world that they do have that knowledge. So it's
right. It was a unique experience taking my first exam after like 20 years of being out of school. And yeah, like flashbacks to exams, but also you really forced my hand and like really getting familiar with the Ontario Seed Guide and the manual, and like recognizing beyond the course material, like the depth and nuance. And it kind of trained me to use the manual as my go-to. But yes, of course, I need mentorship as well going forward. So speaking about mentorship and on-ramps, Sarah, I'm curious about how mentorship relationships play out in the tree planting environment, and how that helps as far as people getting used to that as a job. And I know they're, you know, going to remote camps, and how do you create mentorship? How do you build community and relationship that allows for a successful camp and a successful season?
Yeah, so at tree planting, mentorship is sort of an organic process. We do hire, you know, back to your point, Kristen, we do hire mentors and we pay them to provide that mentorship, and it's so critical to do that. You know, people take it seriously. They realize that there's objectives and goals that they have to meet, and that paid piece is really critical. So that happens, and there's a program for that, but there's also just an organic aspect to it. It's really a community that wants to see everybody. You know, I think you had mentioned, Julian, like you send out the brigade or something. I can't remember what language you use, but that's how it works for us. Is it's less independent contractors and more of a community that has a collaborative effort to get the job done. And so the mentorship happens in every aspect of the day, and folks really want to see each other be successful. And, you know, such challenging conditions, and if anybody's worked in really challenging conditions, you know that the camaraderie that happens out of that is sort of fast and furious, and you build those relationships, and it's those relationships that sort of are a springboard for people to support each other, to be successful at their job. You know, in the OYEP space, so in the youth training program that we work with, that's really a platform where we have formalized mentorship programs as well, but it's really where we integrate on a more basic level everything we're talking about: mentorship, training, that real world experience, so applying the training, and just kind of putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. And we find that because we're executing on these pieces at a bit of an earlier stage, where folks haven't really chosen their educational path, they haven't figured out what they want to do in life, it instills, you know, that passion and excitement in the natural resources sector, whether it's seed collection, reforestation, you know, harvesting, whatever. But it's just planting the seed, no pun intended, at an early, thank you, at an early age, and combining all of those elements we're talking about into a single program, you know, mentorship, training, applied work, a paid position, everything in the same space. So young folks can see it come full circle, see that, you know, ecosystem happen in one fell swoop.
Nice. And we were talking a little earlier with this group about, and I mentioned the statistic about like $27 an hour, which by accounts, like anecdotal accounts, is actually like generous as far as what the hourly rate is, given all of the preparation work and execution work that needs to happen. And in this broader restoration ecology movement, you start seeing the intersection of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And some of those goals talk about SDG 8 is decent work and economic growth, and SDG 10 is reduced inequalities in the work. So how do we go about ensuring that this is decent work? And we, you know, talked about, you know, some people are just going flipping burgers for minimum wage, and that's in, you know, an easier job per se than going out into the bush and doing wild collections or going out and tree planting. Ryan, I'm curious if you can comment on that. Like, how do we ensure that people are paid appropriately and compensated for this really important genetic material that represents the beginning of our tree seed supply chain?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is just education. You know, nobody thinks about the seed. You know, we're going to grow all these trees, we're going to plant them. The seeds often kind of get forgotten in the mix. And people that don't do seed collection don't realize how much work goes into it. You know, it's incredibly labor intensive. It's often time sensitive. You know, you have to get it done in a certain amount of time. So there's long days sometimes. Yeah, I think I've especially this year, I've heard several people say, "Oh, seed collection is easy," and like Kristen said, you know, anybody can go out and collect seed, but like getting good, high quality, genetically diverse seed with high germination rates, that is not easy. That takes planning, it takes preparation, it takes dedication. It's a hard job. You know, there are moments every once in a while I'll find myself picking blueberries on the side of a mountain, and my day is wonderful. But it's still hard work, and I think just educating people, you know, telling companies that purchase the seed or that hire people to go seed collecting, let them know what's entailed and how much work goes into it and how important it is.
Right. Kristen, what are your thoughts on like decent work and appropriate pay and inviting people meaningfully into this craft?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first step is that we need to pay more for seed. But also recognizing that why things are priced the way they are. And even looking across the province, like Ontario has pays like very minimal for seed by comparison to other jurisdictions. And some of that we haven't valued the industry or the system as a whole for a long time. And you know, there was even the case of the Ontario tree seed plant that artificially held prices too low, held them at the same price point year after year, which probably shouldn't have happened. And we have seen a bit of a bump since the closure of the seed plant. But I think also the ideal situation is that there's government policy that helps us value the system and helps increase the value on the system. You know, just looking like BC as an example, right? You know, it's very regulated by the government, and you know, there's a certain amount of a requirement to use orchard seed, which has, you know, had a lot of effort put into it. It has really high genetic value. You know, within that policy, by creating that policy, you create value in that system, right? And orchard seed is much more expensive to purchase than wild seed. And that's for a reason, because there's value in the genetics within that.
Yeah, I think that's such an important piece, is like bringing the price of seed up, ensuring quality of that seed. And another thing that came out in our research is that tree planting organizations were willing to pay up to 25% more for source identification of seed. So figuring out quality and where the seed is from and being able to track that. And especially as carbon markets are growing and biodiversity markets are emerging, I feel like that information becomes more important, and also will bring more people into the industry if we have better prices for people to be collecting against. So speaking of, and I think government playing a role in both, you mentioned keeping the price down and hopefully now increasing or supporting the increase of and making the economics a little bit more interesting for newcomers to the field. Is government, so Sarah, is government playing roles at all in helping to build the labor force for your camps and the tree planting world? And we're starting to ask some of those questions about the government role in helping to train and build seed collector capacity as well. But I'm curious what that looks like in the adjacent industry or the adjacent roles of tree planting.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think the answer is it varies from province to province, and federally, there's not necessarily a program that I'm aware of that's targeted in this specific area, but there's sort of tangibly organizations like Forest Ontario, for example, that would be government supported, that are helping build capacity in this space. So there may not always be a direct link, but there's always sort of a tertiary link to things. But there are, at least in the space that I'm working in and the organizations I'm working in, there are ministries that are coming to the table that are recognizing the need to build capacity. And for me, it's twofold, because it's the natural resources sector, which is desperate for employees, but it's also the Indigenous space as well, and trying to bridge the gap. And so that's where we work. And, we've got organizations like BC Timber Sales, that has been a phenomenal partner in helping build capacity in BC in the natural resources sector with Indigenous youth. We've got the Ministry of Employment and Training in Manitoba, who has been amazing, coming to the table with funding dollars as well to support. It's not always just like a quick ask and execute. There's it's quite a process to get the government involved. But the more these types of conversations are happening, the more awareness I think that's brought to the government level, and hopefully the more involvement that happens, because the largest program we've probably all seen roll out that I think probably has exacerbated this issue is the 2 billion tree program. I think it's probably caused a lot more stress in the seed collection space that maybe wasn't thought about when they launched it. But that would be, I think, the government's efforts to work on the restoration piece, but maybe not thinking through the entire supply chain of it. I feel like you guys probably have some things to say here on that one, because I'm sure you're experiencing it as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can dig deeper into the role of government. We have 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure that if there's any questions from the audience, that you're throwing those in the chat, and we can direct them to our wonderful speakers here. So everybody, please offer any questions that are top of mind for you. And while those questions are coming in, I think I also wanted, for those that are collectors on the call and those that listen to the recorded version of this, where do you get started? Like, what are the on-ramps? How do people get started? And maybe Ryan, will go to you first and then to Kristen on this. But yeah, if you're seed curious, where do you begin? Where should you begin?
Well, I think if you're really, really brand new and you're just curious, is that maybe this is the first time you've ever thought about seeds, just give it a try. If you're out picking blueberries for your freezer, take some of the seeds out of them. Check out our website. If you Google just NAIT Center for Boreal Research, there is tech notes that'll teach you how to extract different species. But yeah, just kind of give it a shot and see if it's something that you find satisfying or interesting. Yeah, take an online course. I think, yeah, just give it a try, I think is the best way to get started initially. And then if you do like it, yeah, maybe you look into a more in-depth course. Maybe you start looking for, if you're a student, maybe your summer job, you try and target something that has a seed collection component. And I think somebody said it earlier that like the seeds, they kind of grab hold of you once you get into them. Seed nerds are a special breed. We get real hooked. So just be careful.
Can we offer college credits and university credits for people collecting seed in September and October as they begin their academic year? Ryan, is that happening at all with NAIT?
Not with us, no, but I like it. I think that's a great idea.
All right, well, we've now planted that seed, so we'll look into that. What about you, Kristen? What would you say? Where do you get started if you are seed curious and you want to get into this space?
Yeah, I would agree with Ryan, is sort of like try it out and obviously then look into getting some training. But yeah, trying it out is important to see whether you're like, wow, I really don't like to stand in a ditch with bugs for, a couple hours. If that's like really off-putting to you, then probably not for you. But if it is something that you find your passion in, and but I think also too, then that next step after getting some training is reaching out. And I think this is sometimes like the people that I've seen through our program that have had the most success taking that next step have been the ones who were not afraid to reach out to a nursery, a forestry company, people who buy seed and say, hey, can I get a contract? I'm new, I'm into this, I'm looking to get started. So I think a lot of it, communication and networking with those organizations, but not being scared to reach out. Like just do it. Yeah.
Great. And on the back of the comments about valuing seed, we have a great question here from Kevin Barkhouse, who asked, do you think that seed co-ops and collectives are a good option to help increase seed supply and help with the labor problem? Kristen, have you seen anything like that emerging in Ontario or beyond that may be a model to pursue?
Yeah, I think a collaborative works as long as it's not relying on free labor, because that's not going to value the seed chain. Because I've seen that too, where a lot of people want to rely on volunteers, and I'm like, that's actually devaluing the system.
Yeah.
But I think it does make sense, and especially where, like Sarah was talking about with this model, where if it was something that it was a group or an organization that could also fulfill other needs, so you can kind of keep people employed and doing that work. I think it does make sense, and especially now with seed, climate change, having to get seed from across different networks, having somebody to coordinate it makes a big difference. And I've even seen that with our, managing our seed orchards and things, that even just with the difference there of having one organization who can help coordinate makes a big difference, right? Like this last year, there was a number of our partners who had trouble getting seed, and some of it was just the coordination and the timing effort versus we had seed orchards, we've been planning it, looking at them all year long, had our labor set up, and we could just go when it was needed, and we made a big collection. So it's there's something to be said about that coordination piece and having it be effective, but I think it does have to be, you have to have enough things to be self-supporting in that.
Right. What about you guys, Ryan and Sarah, from a co-op perspective and supporting labor to organize and be more well represented? Do you see anything emerging in your fields?
Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, so in northeastern Alberta, there's a lot of oil sands mining, and so there is actually an established seed co-op up there already, and it's very successful. So the companies all, they collect the seed that they can, they bank it, and then if a different company needs to use some of that seed, they just commit to replacing that seed at a later date, and it works really, really well. So I'm in favor of it. We'd like to try and come up with something for the Peace Country, so northwestern Alberta and northeastern British So we're still kind of just in the talking phases right now. The The seed zones does make it a little bit tricky. So, you know, people need to definitely be working within those same seed zones here. But I think there's definitely potential for it. And if
Great.
you know, if somebody's really, really successful and gets a big collection, you know, that can last for either for a long time, or some species, you know, we're still figuring out how long they will last. But if it doesn't last for, you know, 30 years or so, like a conifer, maybe it's better to just share that and get it out there and get it used.
Yeah. Great. And we have another great, I know we have 5 minutes or 4 minutes left here. We have another good question from Kimberly Gould, who asks, what is your go-to for difficult to source species? Who do you ask for help? So are there certain species in demand? How do you go about procuring them? And who do you ask for help? Kristen, you want to take that one?
I was gonna say, I feel like that's kind of difficult to answer 100% because being a seed nerd in the realm myself, I usually know who to ask. I don't know. But I guess that, I mean, organizations like myself or Ryan's organizations, other organizations who are in this and who do have a good connection to a network of people across the landscape. If you're looking to source kind of a less common species, there's definitely people out there. Like I will say, a lot of seed is being collected across the landscape. It's not always being overly documented because of the very small scale things. Versus sort of like the forest industry, which is the bulk of the seed volume, but definitely there's sort of a smaller scale realm undercurrent that's maybe less documented, that is still going on, and people who are in the know kind of know, I guess. So
Right.
yeah, ask an organization, I guess, that is in the know, and they could probably direct you to somebody.
Yeah, it feels like there's some opportunity to daylight what the organizations and relationships look like to be able to route requests like this. You know, in our anecdotally, Ryan say, you know, black spruce is in high demand for oil sands reclamation projects, and maybe it's not hard to source, but we know that it's in high demand. Like, how do you activate around that, or what's your response to Kimberly's question on like difficult to source species?
Yeah, my first thought is I'm usually the one being asked for the difficult to source species,
Right.
because we have some pretty extensive collections of not just spruce and pine. So because we are land reclamation focused, we're collecting you know, trees, but also shrubs and forbs and graminoids and pretty much everything. And then just having that network, knowing who to point them in the right direction of. In Alberta, the Alberta Native Plant Council has a big giant list available on their website of seed and native plant producers. So that's a good one I send people to fairly regularly. But yeah, just reach out to somebody like us. I would the National Native the National Tree Seed Center is another great resource. They're, you know, really plugged in all across the country.
Great. Yeah, and we're also playing around with an idea of a job board, which is basically demand signals translated into contracts that people can raise their hand for and say, okay, I'm in this region, I'm local to this region, and I'm able to go and collect with a team or independently. I know we're just getting, we're closing up here. So Blaine, maybe you can switch to the next slide. Again, for anybody that's interested in checking out our tool Squirrel, you can use the QR code, and we're more information available at seedark.io. I want to thank our speakers for spending the time and doing the deep dive with us and unpacking all of these different dynamics around workforce, labor, education, training, industry, partnerships. We covered a very wide conversation today. It feels like maybe just our first of many conversations about labor and training and bringing more people into this space. So yeah, thanks so much for joining, and we look forward to our next sessions, and please join us in future. We'll be doing this monthly. So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks again, guys.